Halls of the Capitol have been very crowded, which is, of course, typical for this type of year. On April 1st, the budget deadline is drawing near, of course, so people are just all over the place trying to get what they need in the budget. This year, there is a new twist, however. It is the unusually high number of education advocates who are flocking to Albany. Last week, we saw more than 1,000 people rallying for more funding for inner-city schools on one day, and then almost 1,000 advocates for disabled children filled the well of the Legislative Office building 2 days later. Today, it was the State School Boards Association's turn to plead its case with state lawmakers. And joining me now to talk more about his organization's lobby day is Executive Director Tim Creamer. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I saw you yesterday, actually.
You did.
You kicked off your lobby day, and I participated in a panel and spoke to your members, and they were all fired up. So I'm sure they had a lot to say. How did it go?
It went well. We had a very good session. We started off with you and other people on our panel, kind of an inside look at what's going on, the lay of the land, what's really in play, what's not in play, what we should pay attention to.
Right.
We then followed that up with our own kind of our staff going through what our priorities are, what our talking points would be. In the evening, we had Chancellor Tisch come and talk to us about what's happening with the State Education Department and the Board of Regents. This morning, we had Comptroller DiNapoli give us a sense of what's going on budget-wise, and he shared with us, we were the first to receive a new report that came out today about school aid.
Well, which actually bolsters your argument, did it not?
It does.
Right.
I think he knew. I think
okay, yes.
he knew the audience would be friendly in that regard.
Explain to the audience, just briefly, what it showed was that, in fact, school districts are financially hurting, and that a certain percentage of them, and which I can't remember off the top of my head, has been cutting very aggressively over the past years, and that many of them now are really facing a situation, despite what the governor says. The governor has made an argument that, in fact, you have districts that are sitting on reserves, and there are some districts that are indeed sitting on reserves.
There are.
And they can perhaps make up this budget cut if, in fact, it goes through. And we should say that the Assembly and the Senate have both proposed actually additional aid restorations in their one-housers. So it looks like it's going to go in that direction. But the idea that there are districts all over the state flush with money is not true.
Well, the governor had a pretty simplistic idea. I'm going to cut $1.5 billion in school aid, but there are school districts out there that have reserves and that they have federal funding, and between those two things they can make up for their aid cut.
Right.
The thing was that the distribution of the aid cuts, coupled side by side with the people who have reserves, side by side with the districts that have some sort of federal money in the bank, they don't add up. So there's a real disparity all over the place. The other thing he didn't count on, which came out in the Comptroller's report today, was the drop in real estate values. And since we are so dependent upon property taxes, we find school districts who you would, frankly, most of them downstate, in Westchester County, Long Island, the Comptroller comes out and he goes, these are the districts that are feeling the most fiscal stress right now because they are so dependent upon local property taxes, less dependent upon state aid. It's kind of an interesting twist.
And also, it doesn't bode well if you consider that a property tax cap might actually be going through. I mean, we've seen it pass already in the Senate, but not in the Assembly. So if, in fact, that happened and you were capping the amount of revenue that you could raise off property taxes, which is really the only revenue raiser that you've got going on, and you don't have the well that you used to, you're in some serious trouble.
We are. We have districts that are highly dependent upon property taxes, and if they are capped and they have cuts in state aid and the federal funds are gone, they really only have one place to do, and that's cost controls. That gets us to the whole mandate relief issue, and unfortunately, we just aren't seeing much on mandate relief. Frankly, even the property tax cap has kind of gone over to the sidelines for now.
Okay, but you must feel in some ways a little bit bolstered because over the weekend when the Senate and the Assembly put out their one-house bills, they did have restoration aid was for the education sector was actually a focus for both of them.
Absolutely. I was tied up so much over the weekend that I really wasn't able to study either one of these bills, but I was over there at the Capitol all day today and was getting it from both houses, telling me what was in there and advocating on behalf of our support for their one-house bills.
Well, which one do you like better?
Well, that's a good question because they're all tied with additional strings attached. But, in fact, the one that really came out with the most meat on it was that of the Assembly. But it only has $200 million. They use the millionaire's tax to raise additional revenue. apparently about 700 million, as I'm told, because they've raised it from all the way to a real millionaire tax, where the threshold is $1 million. But they're only taking 200 million of that and putting it towards school aid. But they have other things in there that they reject, a number of cost shifts that the governor would say, we at the state are not going to pay this, we're going to make school districts pay for this or somebody else. They've rejected a lot of that. So we've got a lot of money heading our way from both houses, but they're not that much money. It's 200 on the Assembly side, about 265 on the Senate side. The fact that they are so close, though, tells me that maybe we will get an on-time budget.
Well, and the governor has also signaled that he is open to restoration as long as the budget in the end has that top number that he's looking for. And, you know, there's two things here. First of all, the Senate, it has also ended this 40-21 school cut that the governor wanted to make, right? A reclassification of 40-21 schools. Did the Assembly do that?
The Assembly, I think that was one of the things that they did. They said they called that a cost shift.
Right.
And as far as I understood, they said, no, we reject that idea. This is the idea of these kids who are deaf or blind or both, also other very significant disabilities that are in these 11 separate facilities.
Yeah.
They're spending about $98,000 per kid. It's about $100 million. Honestly, I don't understand why the governor is going after this population, but I do understand that he is putting things out there, and then these houses, both the Senate and the Assembly, have to buy those things back.
Okay, well, that's the whole point. I mean, what we're talking about is negotiations. When you put something out there that really is difficult, when you have, it's a heart-tugging issue. You have kids who are in wheelchairs, you have kids who are very, obviously, no lawmaker wants to see a kid or that person's parents coming to them and asking them for this restoration. Why are you hurting my child who's already going through so much? Yes, they have to buy it back. And you guys were talking about this yesterday, distracts you from other things that you might have to do. You don't have the time for it because you're fighting over here for this pot of money.
Well, you heard me tell my members, do not be distracted. Our issues were state aid, proposed property tax cap, and mandate relief. And a lot of these other issues over there, we got to be careful not to get pulled in one direction while the big stuff over here is happening. We're over here messing around with the little stuff.
Right. Well, the superintendent's salary cap, for example, is another one of those. And you have a lot of different balls in the air. So it seems like you are going to end up faring fairly well. In a painful year where everybody gets cut, you're going to get some of what you thought was going to be very bad back.
I would say that is very possible. We'll have to wait and see where we end up with this property tax cap and mandate relief, which I'm really trying to hold on to make sure those don't get separated.
Right.
If we lose the property tax cap goes through and we do nothing about mandate relief, we're really in trouble. But if we could hold those together, that's helpful. But you're right. We are going to have both houses coming to the aid and saying, we're going to restore some of these cost shifts. We're going to restore some of this aid cut. And I think they want to try to do some things about the distribution as well. I think almost universally people are saying, you know, the way in which the governor has proposed these cuts has really hurt some disparate. There's much disparity between one set of districts and another. Some districts are getting hurt way too much than they should. Let's try to fix that cut system. Okay, well, not very much more time, but in budget days, it's actually years from now before a budget is actually due because it's due on April 1st. We are heading, hopefully, we think, all sides say, for an on-time budget. Yeah. So we will keep our fingers crossed. In the meantime, I want to thank you, Tim Krugman, for coming in. I really appreciate it. My pleasure.